What's going on, Vikings fans? Welcome in the Vikings Now by Chat Sports. My name is Patrick Siepman, and coming up on today's show, Kwesi Adofo-Mensah just cut 14 players from the Vikings roster as cutdown day is tomorrow at 4 p.m. Central Time. Then also on the later half of today's show, I do want to talk about the possibility of trading Lewis Cine and maybe even Dalton Risner, but we'll dive into that later. But before we dive into it, guys, I just want to say thank you so much for 28,000 subscribers. My goal before week one, heading into the offseason, was to hit 28K for my man Adrian Peterson, and you guys did that. So, that honestly made my day late last night. So, seriously, all credit to you guys, and thank you so much. But could we hit 29K before week one for another Vikings running back legend, Chester Taylor? So, if you guys haven't already and want to stay up to date around your favorite football team, hit that subscribe button. But let's fly through these moves here, and then we'll talk about Lewis Cine on the back half of today's show. So the Vikings did start off the roster moves by cutting Matt Corral, and Matt Corral was signed a couple days before the Cleveland Browns game in week 2 of the preseason, and then he did get an opportunity in week 3 versus the Eagles, but he didn't really have too much of a chance to throw the ball as he was 2 of 3 for 13 yards. But I thought this was expected, especially after, Jaren Hall played his ass off against the Browns and the Eagles. And I fully expect the Vikings to keep 3 quarterbacks on that final 53-man roster. I am almost 110% certain. I don't think the Vikings want to risk, Hall having to clear waivers and then have him be back on the practice squad. But the second move the Vikings made, they cut Dwayne McBride. Now, I was a little shocked by this. But I guess the Vikings just didn't view him as a player that was going to get any type of carries during the season. He was cut last year as well. But this was a man who was a 7th-round pick out of UAB who in his senior year in college averaged over 7 yards per carry. I was kind of hoping maybe he would have been a good rotational back for the Vikings. But obviously, with Kene Nwangwu playing good in the first preseason game, Ty Chandler stepping up, and even a guy like Myles Gaskin who is running very, very hard the last 2 games, Vikings are probably going to keep those 4 running backs and then also C.J. Ham. But let's get it to the big fella, the tight end, Sammis Reyes, as 6'7", 240 pounds. Immediately when the Vikings signed him and I saw his height and weight, I was like, oh, this guy's got all types of potential. But he was actually the first player from Chile to play in the NFL. Shout out to producer Tex for adding that note. I did not know that. But he did go to Loyola, New Orleans for his school. But, with the Vikings having N'Keal Harry step up in the tight end room, Robert Tonyan, he'll probably make the team. And then you still got Josh Oliver and T.J. Hockenson as a tight end. It would just be very, very hard to make this roster. But another running back that was cut, who was actually just signed by the Minnesota Vikings, Mo Ibrahim. Now, he was a stud playing his collegiate football at the University of Minnesota. I was a massive fan of his. He always ran hard. He did have some injury history, so that was a big reason why he did go undrafted a couple of drafts ago. But he only got 4 carries for the Vikes in the preseason, had 16 yards. I always felt like he ran very, very hard. But, there just wasn't a spot on him for this team for this upcoming year. But let's kick it to a cornerback here who... This was another obvious cut, Jalen Williams, and I think after, the signing of Stephon Gilmore, after UDFA, Dwight McGlothern has absolutely dominated the preseason, it was going to be really hard for a couple of these guys to crack that 53-man roster at the cornerback position, because you're going to keep, Shaq Griffin, Byron Murphy, Stephon Gilmore, and then Dwight McGlothern's going to be there, and then it was probably going to be a Caleb Evans. Probably only going to keep 5 corners as well. So these other guys like Duke Shelley, Jalen Williams, they just obviously are going to be looking on the outside in on the 53-man roster. But let's kick it to another pass catcher here. What about Neal Johnson? I was pretty high on him when the Vikings brought him in. He played his collegiate football at Louisiana, but he only had 1 catch in the preseason. It is very tough if you're a pass catcher to make this roster, especially with Tristan Jackson, Jalen Naylor, Brandon Powell, like some of these guys really playing well in the preseason. If you didn't completely go out there and ball out, you had just necessarily no chance to make this team. And, another guy who had a hell of a game against the Eagles this past weekend, Justin Hall. I love the call I had on the play-by-play where I was like, Hall finds Hall for 6. But he ended up getting cut. He had 2 receptions, 24 yards, 1 touchdown. He plays very physical brand of football. I'm a big fan of his game. He's actually a guy where if he does clear waivers, which I'm anticipating he will, I would actually be thrilled if the Vikings could bring him back. He's a very physical slot receiver. I honestly thought maybe he had a chance to play fullback if he does beef up, maybe the 210 pounds, because then he does have that pass-catching ability, which is so valuable. And I think these offensive coordinators nowadays in the league are trying to find that fullback similar to Juszczyk and also the fullback for Miami. And, C.J. Ham's a decent pass catcher, but his Father Time's continuing to tap him on the shoulder. Maybe he could be a fullback for the Vikes here in the future. But another guy that was cut, Owen Porter, a little disappointing on this one. I was a big fan of his coming out of Marshall, and in terms of the whole UDFA class for the Vikes, like Porter, Taki, who we'll talk about in a later video this week, McGlothern, like all these other guys, really ended up playing over their expectations. Porter necessarily did not do that, so he ended up getting cut. Then an offensive lineman here that was cut, who actually had a decent preseason for the Vikes, Chuck Filiaga, I believe that's how you pronounce his name, but 6'6", 321 pounds, age 26, went to Minnesota, and, he graded out pretty well in the preseason. 53.2 overall, 52.8 run blocking grade, and a 55.4 pass blocking grade. But we just gave you guys about 9 or 10 of the cuts. Did any of these cuts shock you guys? For me, personally, not at all. Now, there is going to be big question marks around Dalton Risner, Lewis Cine, Duke Shelley, and we'll break down those, here in the near future once we get word on that. But you guys let me know, so far, has any of these shocks cut you, or has any of these shocks cut you? If any of these cuts shock you, let me know your thoughts down below in the comments section. Now, I do want to give a massive shout out to today's presenting sponsor of Vikings Now, and that is Factor Meals. And if you guys head to factormeals.com/VikingsChat50, we will hook you guys up with 50% off your first box, plus 20% off your next month. Now, warmer, sunnier days are calling. Fuel up for them with Factor's no prep, no mess meals. Meet your wellness goals in time for summer thanks to the menu of chef-crafted meals with options like Calorie Smart, Protein Plus, and Keto. Factor's fresh, never frozen meals are dietitian approved and ready to eat in just 2 minutes. So no matter how busy you are, you'll always have time to enjoy nutritious, great tasting meals. Now with 35 different meals and more than 60 add-ons to choose from every week, you'll always have new flavors to explore. So help crush your wellness goals this month with dietitian approved meals and ingredients that you can trust. Make your day delicious from breakfast to dessert. Stay fueled with easy nutrition options, and you can also treat yourself to restaurant quality meals that feature premium ingredients like filet mignon, shrimp, and blackened salmon. So keep kitchen time to a medium. Factor meals are ready in 2 minutes. No shopping, prepping, cooking, or cleanup needed. So head to factormeals.com/VikingsChat50 and use code VikingsChat50 to get 50% off your first box plus 20% off your next month. That's code VikingsChat50 at factormeals.com/VikingsChat50 to get 50% off your first box plus 20% off your next month while your subscription is active. So the next cut the Vikings made was Doug Nestor. He was in the UDFA class this past season. Never really got too much rotational snaps for the Vikes this past year during the preseason. Thought it was a pretty obvious one as well. And then also Matthew Cindric. He ended up getting cut as well. Didn't play at all during the preseason. So this was another obvious one for Kwesi and his staff. But then we can also kick it to Spencer Rowland here. I thought he had an outside chance maybe to make the roster. I was a fan of him coming out of North Carolina. Big body, can move pretty well, but, just his technique, it just wasn't up to par with where the Vikings, wanted him to be. But this was also not a shocker, I will say, but he was a guy I was rooting for. Tyler Manoa, 6'5" defensive lineman, 315 pounds, 24 years old, out of Arizona. He did have 5 tackles in the preseason, so I thought, maybe in a crazy scenario he had a chance to make the team, but obviously the Vikings ended up letting him go. But let's talk about the 2 biggest question marks here in terms of making this roster, and I think these would be 2 names where if they would get cut, another team immediately would try to swing them on their roster. That's Lewis Cine and Dalton Risner. But I do want everybody to be prepared for a potential Lewis Cine trade. And the biggest reason for that is the Vikings' 2025 draft capital is the lowest in the entire National Football League. As it stands right now, they just have a first-round pick and 2 fifth-round picks. Now, could the Vikings maybe swing a 6 or 7 for Lewis Cine? Maybe. Don't really have too much insight on that. But Lewis Cine also talked about his future with the Vikings, saying this, somebody asked him this after the Cleveland Browns game, saying, I'm not oblivious to knowing this is a business at the end of the day, but I'm confident in myself. A healthy me is a dangerous me. That's all I can say about that. Now, I am sure Lewis Cine, heading into this preseason, knew he was going to have a great preseason to make this final 53-man roster. And he probably knew he just needed to put good tape out on himself, as other teams really don't know who he was. If you weren't in Vikings practices every single day, you didn't have a ton of tape on Cine, considering he only played 12 defensive snaps in the regular season. And I thought it was hilarious against the Browns, where Cine absolutely lit it up. But the Vikings were clearly trying to put good tape out there for Cine during the last 2 games. It was actually hilarious. Brian Flores completely changed up his schemes. He completely changed up his coverages, in my opinion, to make Lewis Cine look the best he can. And I think that's the part of the NFL I love the most, is the gamesmanship, where it's like, you have a guy who's probably not going to make your roster, so let's go out there and let's make him look fantastic for maybe another team. Throws you a 5th, 6th, 7th round pick, whatever it may be, for Cine. But I do want to talk about Dalton Risner here, as Alec Lewis had a very, very interesting quote about him. He said a few weeks ago, Risner suffered a back injury. He has not practiced since, nor has he been present. The Vikings added him as a reliable depth on the interior of the offensive line, but you have to be available to offer insurance. And like Murphy, Gabe Murphy, he too might be a candidate for injured reserve. Teams have 2 spots for players who don't count against the 53-man roster, and tight end TJ Hawkinson will occupy one of them. A player like Murphy, who is still young and developing, might warrant the nod more than backup guard, even if Blake Brandel and Ed Ingram are not stalwarts. Now, I do think the Vikings need Risner for insurance. Like, if you guys have paid attention to what Ed Ingram has done during the preseason, he's been terrible. And you're hoping he'll be able to, shake out the inconsistencies of his game and really develop into the 3rd-round pick we expected him to be coming out of LSU. But I would like Risner on this 53-man roster as just insurance. But personally, if I had to pick Risner or Gabe Murphy to go to that IR spot next to TJ Hawkinson, I would probably lean Gabe Murphy. He's got all types of potential. He was supposed to be a top 100 pick in the draft, and I promise you this, Gabe Murphy hits the waiver wire, he'll be one of the first names picked up by an opposing team. But I just want to say thank you guys so much for watching today's show. If you guys made it to the end, give me a SKOL down below in the comments section. Make it look like US Bank Stadium on game day. And we'll also have another video coming out later today. So make sure you guys do stay tuned for that. But also give me a follow on Twitter. That's the handle right there at Pat Sieps. If you guys do so, I'll give you guys a follow back. But see you guys next time. SKOL Vikes.